You got to get to indifference. Now, getting indifferent is the ultimate unmask because it's the equivalent of letting a toddler tantrum in the middle of the restaurant and not feeling embarrassed about it and not caring what anybody thinks about you. Now, getting to indifference, especially in a narcissistic relationship, is not easy, especially if you even feel a shred of compassion for the narcissistic person. Oh, covert narcissism. It's a confusing one, right? So let's talk a little bit about it because this insight might help you understand a bit more about it. So there is so much misunderstanding with this term covert narcissism, right? And everyone's using it in different ways. People who do sort of the academic research, the narcissism researchers, they actually believe it means the elements of narcissism we don't directly witness. For example, we can't really see a person's thoughts or beliefs or feelings or perceptions. Now, obviously, those covert things in their mind easily convert over to overt narcissism, which is the observable stuff. The words they say, the things they do, and the overt arrogance, the entitlement, demanding attention, why am I waiting in this line, that kind of thing. Now, for a long time, people have used the term covert narcissism to mean the same thing as vulnerable narcissism. A lot of people would argue that's not an entirely accurate usage. Vulnerable narcissism, in contrast to grandiose narcissism, is of course the more anxious, quietly hostile, passive-aggressive, victimized, sullen, sort of brooding presentation of narcissism, right? These are folks that may at first blush or at different times look more socially anxious, more irritable, less extroverted, and frankly, they are often less successful than their grandiose narcissistic peers. Now, the other way people use the term or the words covert narcissism is sort of as hidden narcissism. And by that they mean it's the narcissism that, for example, doesn't show up right away or didn't show up right away or isn't always shown to other people. Or it's the narcissism that only shows up, the narcissistic behaviors and patterns that only show up when there are no witnesses present, right? Or it's only witnessed by the same core of the family or a subset of coworkers or friends. It's the covert narcissism then becomes the idea that there are times, especially earlier in the relationship, that these more narcissistic, observable patterns didn't show up regularly. Now they're showing up from time to time and even more than time to time. I have a lot of people who approach me and say, I was in a marriage for 30 years with a covert narcissist, or my mother all my life has been a covert narcissist. And when I ask them for clarification about what did they mean by that, it's usually what they describe to me is sort of this hybrid of vulnerable narcissism and a more hidden narcissism. It's not the big, bright, shiny, in your face, malignant or grandiose narcissism. In most cases, covert narcissism is a mashup of vulnerable narcissism and this sort of idea of hidden narcissism. Like I said, it's not the in-your-face, grandiose, arrogant, preening, bragging, pretentious, show-off, status-seeking, look at my new watch, validation-seeking narcissist that you tend to see on your Instagram feed. This is something quite different. Now, the important thing to sort of be aware of is that a lot of narcissism, and any form of narcissism, does remain hidden or covert. Because the really unsettling, uncomfortable, icky, antagonistic, narcissistic stuff doesn't show up in these people who we later on call covert narcissists until they are triggered. Now, I know people hate this word triggered. Use whatever damn word you like. If you like different words better, when they're activated, when they get set off, when they feel threatened. But it takes that for their narcissistic stuff to show up. So let me give you some examples of the kind of stuff that can trigger or activate or threaten or set off this covert narcissistic person. So first, there's the sort of in-your-face stuff. Again, this is more overt stuff we can see. The stuff that can trigger a narcissistic person include criticism, constructive feedback, you, as the other person in the relationship, being recognized or getting an honor or getting a promotion, a friend of theirs doing better than them, a person being rude to them, a person doing something like trying to cut in front of them in line or doing what they perceive as taking advantage of them, a person not giving them something that they think they're supposed to get, a person insulting them, or you having a social group or friends or family around you who are praising you. And then some of the stuff that sets off, that triggers this sort of covert narcissistic pattern or person is actually stuff that's happening inside of them, often in response to these other things. But it's things like them feeling inadequate, them feeling insecure, them feeling incompetent, them feeling that everyone else has it better than them believing life is uniquely unfair to them feeling that other people do not adequately recognize their gifts and their expertise and their wonderfulness, them feeling like someone is making fun of them. Now, I know what you're thinking. Aren't we all bothered by this? Yes, but we can regulate. Now, there are a lot more than these, and you can feel free to add to the things you have witnessed in the comment section. But when these things happen, these triggers happen, and set off that entire insecurity and shame cascade within the narcissistic person, that is when this covert narcissism becomes overt. And what you might see is very loud, almost unsettling displays of anger. You may see really long-term passive aggression and silent treatment. You may see them shift blame onto you. You may witness them throw a tantrum. You may experience them insulting you, really hitting below the belt. You may experience them making odd projections, like accusing you or cheating or something like that, or saying that you're going to leave them. You may experience things like gaslighting. Again, many of us get set off by these things, but it's the consistency and the brutality. Okay? Because again, I know you're thinking, well, Dr. Ramani, when we experienced those things, you said, yeah, those various triggers, those various threats, call them what you will, none of us are at our best. We're not. Every one of us can say, yeah, when I feel those things, I am definitely not my best. But people who are not antagonistic, like I said, are going to be more likely to regulate themselves more often than not. And when we regulate ourselves, that means that we can take responsibility. We can breathe. We can remain aware of potentially our contribution to a situation if that's relevant. We can be open to the feedback even if it's uncomfortable. We can be aware of other people's feelings and not scream at them. We might take a walk. Like I said, we may breathe. We may cry in private. And even if you as a healthier person or anyone as a healthy person doesn't respond gracefully, maybe we do kick it up. Maybe we do yell. Maybe we do get passive aggressive. A healthy person will apologize and own their behavior. It's the triggers that make the covert narcissism more observable and seeable. And it can take a minute to understand this pattern, especially, for example, if the covert narcissistic person is actually often a little bit more mild-mannered. And they do their thing, and they might be a little bit of a buzzkill or a bit of a malcontent, but they're not really lashing out, right? It doesn't even seem like it sounds like what we talk about as narcissism. You may even rationalize the covert narcissistic person's behavior as well. They're just really sensitive when they get criticized, or they're just really insecure, aren't we all? Or they're just embarrassed, and no one's at their best when they're embarrassed. And you know what? Those things may be true, and good for you for having empathy for that, but it doesn't rationalize the behavior. At some point, even a 4-year-old gets a timeout for their tantrums. Now, this back and forth in these more covert narcissistic folks between what feels like the sort of normal or normal adjacent quality of the covert narcissistic person that then varies or goes back and forth with their blow-ups or other patterns like pathological jealousy. And pathological jealousy is a very signature quality of covert narcissistic people who, especially when they are triggered or threatened, will start down the suspicious paranoid rabbit hole and either suspect a partner of cheating or flirting or other inappropriate behavior, or have the sense that people are out to get them, or that everyone at work is unfair only to them. And once that cycle begins, it's very hard to get that sort of cognitive genie back into the bottle with a covert narcissist. As a relationship with a covert narcissistic person proceeds over time, the gaps between normal days and the blow-ups because of their triggers, well, those gaps become smaller and smaller. You may find that where once upon a time you had decent weeks or months in the relationship, that what happens is that starts to get narrower and narrower, and it's at best you might get a decent few hours. It's as though the sense of threat lights a fuse in the narcissistic person, kindles a flame, and it shifts the covert narcissistic person to always being more vigilant to threats, especially if their life isn't going the way they want, and they become more and more thin-skinned in the relationship over time. Now, some of this relates to the shame cycle, where the covert narcissistic person doesn't like being the person that people have to walk on eggshells around, right? It's a bit of a paradox. But if people don't walk on eggshells, then the covert narcissistic person blows up or withdraws or withholds. But if the covert narcissistic person senses that you are walking on eggshells, well, then that's a trigger too. And you start to see how over time, a relationship with a covert narcissistic person is either you living coiled up in tension, or cleaning up the messes of their tantrums, or living in fear of their tantrums, or living in the bizarro world of silent treatment. Now, when you look back at one of these covert narcissistic relationships, whether you're still in it or not, it becomes eminently clear what their triggers were. The pattern starts to show itself. But because in almost all of these cases of covert narcissistic folks, you don't have that kind of easy to see, shiny, arrogant, prancing, grandiose narcissist. At the times when the covert narcissistic person is not activated or threatened or triggered, the relationship can kind of feel normal, maybe not always fun. The covert narcissistic person you might even have the experience of them as being sad or sensitive. And then you sort of feel your hands are tied. Because even once you recognize that this is a whole insecurity, sensitivity, imposter thing, well, you can't point that out to the covert narcissistic person saying, I get why you're angry. It's about your imposter syndrome. Because then more shame, more anger, more dysregulation. And then it becomes patently clear you can't win. The paradox of the covert narcissistic relationship is that unlike relationships with grandiose narcissistic folks or malignant narcissistic folks, these relationships tend to pull more for pity and guilt from us, as well as the usual stuff like frustration, self-blame, confusion, rumination, all the usual narcissistic abuse fallout. Because the insecurity and social anxiety and shame are right there, kind of right under the surface, you may have found that in that relationship you did kind of feel bad for them. Because again, it's almost like that shame and frustration was almost starting to pop out under their skin. And if you have empathy, it gets tough, because that means that relationships with covert narcissistic folks may be the most difficult to get out of psychologically. Listen, malignant narcissistic relationships are very tough to get out of because of the very real fears of post-separation abuse. Grandiose narcissistic relationships can be very hard to get out of because it's actually kind of fun, and you know they're going to replace you just like that. But these covert narcissistic relationships can often leave you feeling like you're the bad one for being frustrated with them or wanting to leave. And it can be very difficult to break out of that cycle, even after you've left. But once you unearth that pattern of threats and triggers that set off this covert narcissistic pattern, and you then can see it, and you know exactly which triggers do, it's like breaking a code. And it will be eminently clear to you how this relationship works from that point forward. It doesn't necessarily mean that seeing it this clearly makes it easier to navigate the relationship or leave, but you feel less crazy, and that is worth something. But again, I can already hear you through this screen that some of you are saying, oh, I'm insecure. I'm insecure because of this relationship. And when I'm insecure, I'm not at my best, and I'm not always regulated. And sometimes I do lash out, or sometimes I do get a zinger in there. I know that this video for some of you might leave you saying, oh, I always wondered if I'm narcissistic. Maybe I kind of am. What you have to look at is not just the behaviors, because I agree, there's some universality, and this is the tricky piece with narcissistic folks. Some of their reactions make absolute sense, especially when you know their history and all of that. It's not so much the mess, it's the cleanup. Because we as human beings are not perfect. We are going to make mistakes in our relationships. We are going to say the wrong things. We are going to do the wrong things. We are going to get triggered. We're not going to be perfect. The imperfect reaction does not the narcissist make. It's what happens after. Again, it's the cleanup. And after it happens, the narcissistic person doubles down. They blame the other person. They double down on sort of the paranoid threat, like everyone's out to get me. No one understands me. Everyone hates me. It's all your fault for not being nice to me. And will withhold even longer until everyone else comes and has to fix the mess, right? And other people even apologizing when they're not the ones who did something wrong. For everyone else who is more healthy, who's done the work, frankly, the cleanup then becomes a genuine apology, a recognition that you hurt someone, not I'm sorry you feel that way. That is not an apology. Or I didn't mean that, or I didn't intend that. That is not an apology. It's I really treated you badly, or that reaction was completely out of hand. I am so sorry. I am so sorry for however that left you feeling, and then listening to the other person sharing their feelings and tolerating that discomfort. None of us are perfect. Narcissistic people, healthy people, that's being a human being. The cleanup is everything. And in all narcissistic patterns, including covert narcissistic patterns, we don't see the cleanup. A lot of people, they get stuck. Am I the narcissist? That's really the ringer. If you have ever been in a relationship with a vulnerable narcissistic person in particular, then you already get what I'm about to talk about. While grandiose narcissistic folks definitely put themselves out there in a different way, and they want to be leaders and do stuff because it's in line with their goals and their achievement and their aspiration, which in turn gives them status and dominance, these vulnerable narcissistic folks are different. Vulnerable narcissistic people are buried under shame and often have negative moods like anxiety and sadness and anger. They often have low self-esteem, but they also have the low empathy, the oppositionality, I'm not going to do that, you can't make me, the suspiciousness, the antagonism. But a pattern that you can see in vulnerable narcissism, especially when there is that communal stuff in there, is that they'll do stuff for other people. Sometimes it's a way for them to connect. Sometimes it's a way to get attention. Sometimes it's a way to fortify a grandiose sense of themselves as a do-gooder. And then sometimes it's just because they can do the thing and someone asks them and they do it, right? But this is a dynamic that's often observed with vulnerable narcissistic parents and often narcissistic mothers. Narcissistic mothers will do stuff you don't want them to do. Stuff you never asked them to do. And this stuff they do can often feel intrusive. For example, they may buy you stuff that you don't need or want. They may make you a doctor's appointment you don't want. They may think they are doing you some great favor by making a connection with a friend of theirs, a professional connection or something like that, with a friend of theirs who works in a field you're interested in, and then you're obligated to call the person, and it ended up being an utter waste of time, or even worse. They get you food you don't want. They come to your house when you are sick, when you expressly ask them to not do so you can sleep. They may do way too much decorating and preparing and stuff like for a holiday or a birthday, and none of this is stuff you want. You might have even said, please, please don't do all this. Because when you do in these relationships ask for something you want or make clear something that you really don't want, what you're going to get back in these relationships is anger, coldness, the silent treatment, passive aggression, victimhood. You may say things like, hey, please don't bring me that table for our party. Bring me that table for my new apartment. I got myself a table that matches the style of my apartment. And they may insist or tell you, give this table a chance. And you kind of get worn down by them and may agree, okay, let me just look at it, just to get them off the phone or to shut them the hell up. And then when they bring the table over, despite you telling them to not do that, and you say, oh my gosh, there's this table here. What am I supposed to do with this? I have a small apartment. I have nowhere to put it. They will look hurt and upset. And now, despite you attempting in every way possible to communicate that you didn't want this table, because now you're going to face the headache of having to get it out because you can't fit it, you now not only have the headache of a table you don't want, you are having to tend to their hurt feelings. If you have been through one of these types of relationships, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I can almost see through the screen that you're ruefully nodding at this video all the way from here. I actually think that this whole resentful, martyr, intrusive, victimized mashup can result in the avoidant relationship patterns that people who find themselves stuck in vulnerable narcissistic relationships develop. You get to the place where you're afraid to accept anything from someone for fear of how it will come back to bite you, and you sort of live in that fear. The resentful martyr is the person who does these so-called helpful things. But there are 4 big issues that arise with the resentful martyr. Number 1, the things that these resentful martyrs do are not things you want, they're not things you need, and there's no attempt on their side to determine if this thing they want to do or give is actually something that would be useful. They do what they want to do. For example, they buy the thing they like for you and expect you to like it. Or they make the food they like and they bring it to you. And they may fill their fridge, or they may fill your fridge with food that you won't eat. And now you feel awful about wasting all this food. They show up when it works for them. They call when it works for them. They text you all day to check on you, or send you videos or memes or articles that you are too damn busy to look at, and then ask you, did you look at it? Did you look at it? Did you look at it? Or they organize a birthday thing the way they want, but at no point in any of this are you consulted. Number 2, if you don't thank them for this thing you didn't want them or need them to do, and you don't thank them the way they want to be thanked, or appreciate them, or acknowledge them effusively, publicly, ideally with a big Instagram post, or around a table full of people, and it can't be one thank you, you have to thank them a lot, or you have to acknowledge them a lot. So, for example, if you don't respond to that text or that meme, then you're in trouble. Again, even though you don't want this thing that they're doing, offering, giving. If you don't express endless gratitude about something you actually don't want, well then, the martyr turns dark. Now at this juncture, because you did not express enough gratitude and thanks for something you didn't want, you may face their anger, a sort of turning of the tables, and you get called ungrateful, demanding, difficult, unkind, mean. They may give you the silent treatment or one-word answers. They may mope and act like a victim. They may even cry and tell you that you do not appreciate them. They may have a torrent of resentment and anger and hurt, and you will feel really guilty because after all, they did a nice martyr-like thing, and here you are, not appreciating the dinged-up dining table that used to hold the power tools in the garage that they wanted to get rid of, or that they take the time to stay in touch, or that they baked you cupcakes. Your diabetes be damned. Number 3, number 3, and if you try to set it up in a better way, so basically if you play on their martyr need by telling them what you need. So then you're like, okay, if they want to do stuff, let them do the thing I need, in hopes that they will then maybe do the thing that you want or need them to do. And then you can genuinely thank them effusively because it would be helpful. Well, that's a problem too. Because their martyr-like helping isn't about them being attuned to you and them offering something helpful or useful, or maybe even not doing something and giving you some space. For example, at a busy time or on a year when you decide to go on a trip with some friends for your birthday, well, that's not going to work. They are doing what they want to do. And if you make these things known, the things that you want, well, could you do this for me? Now you're the one who's demanding and bossy and needy and difficult or just unappreciative. And you tell them like, hey, you know what? So funny, but can you not send me those video texts at work? Instead of them saying, oh God, of course, you will get like, oh, you and your big job, you're so important that you can't open a text. Sorry for bothering you, big shot. And when the resentful martyr thing happens, most people feel guilty because ostensibly this person who did something, they did do something ostensibly nice. It's just not something you needed or may not even be nice for you. I remember a woman I know, her entire aesthetic was like this minimalism, like black, brown, beige, white in summer maybe. She wore very tailored clothing. It was very monochromatic. It was her style and everyone knew it. And she was telling me how she had both a narcissistic mom and the mom's sister, a narcissistic aunt. And every single year for decades, they would buy her clothes that were not only not the right size, but were festooned with ribbons and flowers and these flouncy necks. Literally the opposite of what this woman would ever wear. And the woman told me that she literally felt like she was insane. Like, what were they seeing when they saw her? Now, she did her healing work on narcissism, and after years of being mad about it, she then learned that, she's like, they were kind of more mildly narcissistic, so she didn't want to cut them out. She sort of learned to ooh and ah and thank them. She'd go home, she'd take a few pictures of herself in the clothes in different parts of her house and outside, different poses, and she would keep them to send them down the line. She would leave the tags on the clothes and then she'd give them all to a charity shop. She said she couldn't do this though if she had to interact with them regularly, and she didn't. She lived some distance away from them. And the extent of her interactions, like I said, was a handful of holidays. But I thought the smart thing was she took a lot of different pictures of herself in these clothes so she could send them throughout the year. But if you would have to navigate this every day, food showing up that you can't eat, or bags of old clothes, or favors you don't want, it can really get challenging as it accumulates. And you recognize that you were choosing really between two evils, two problems, either given to their madness and praise them for everything, which is not sustainable, especially if the resentful martyr keeps showing up when they want and is intrusive in your workday or is intrusive in your social circle or other important aspects of your life like your kids. And there's also a fantasy that if you were to praise them enough, that they will stop. And no. In fact, behavioral science would argue that they will do it more because they're getting rewarded. You're thanking them so much, they feel that they're great. Like, well, I'm going to keep doing this. The other path is to ask this resentful martyr to stop. And, well, that all comes down to your own appetite for victimhood, silent treatment, sullenness, passive aggression, and tears. Lots of people feel really guilty. The clothes lady said first she was angry, and then she felt guilty, and then she took advantage of the situation she was in. Like, she didn't have to see them a lot, and she just devised her plan that worked for her. But she did describe a lot of anger initially about the intrusiveness and the guilt that she felt secondary to her the resentfulness and really the manipulation. She's like, sure, maybe they're looking at me and saying, we hate your clothes, you look drab, then have the conversation. But sending things that and expecting her to wear them that weren't even the right size, that felt like a bridge too far. It's a tricky position because to an outside observer, it may seem that you have an attentive parent. And some folks may even leave you feeling icky with like, I know you don't want the table, but that sure was really nice for them to go through all that effort. And they might say something like, my parent would never do that. Or you may encounter the person who says, damn, when I'm sick, my parent doesn't even notice or doesn't even call me. Or there might be the person who says to you, wow, they call you every day? You talk every day? That must be nice to be close to your family. And yet the conversations aren't nice. It does feel intrusive, and you have to allow yourself to identify your experience for what it is. Vulnerable narcissistic folks, when they have this communal narcissistic cherry on top, will get their validation from this sense of themselves as such a good, helpful, giving person. It's their identity. But it's just that. It's an identity. It's actually not based on attunement and empathy. It's how they want to be viewed rather than who they really are. Because the healthy version of this, of a person who wants to do acts of service or be of service, is that they ask and communicate and attune. They don't just show up and start banging at the door with chicken soup that you don't need, or send you 25 texts on a day when you're in bed with the flu and get angry at how ungrateful you are for not responding to their texts, or give you stuff or assistance that you don't want. And they will hold a grudge, like forever. They will bring up the birthday 25 years ago where you didn't appreciate the sweater they gave you, or that you only wore it once. They will remind you that 9 months ago you didn't respond to their text, despite them taking care of you when you had COVID. For people who are so damned inattentive and can't remember to pick up milk from the grocery store when you ask them 3 times, it is fascinating how long people with these personality styles can hold grudges for a really long time. The whole concept of being a martyr is that martyrs aren't really supposed to be a thing among the living. My understanding is that to really be a martyr, you have to have already been gone from this earthly existence. And maybe that's the thing. The simultaneously grandiose but neurotic need to be viewed as a living sort of savior, helper, greatest person ever, and then pouting when they aren't viewed that way, dead or alive. Not only is that not being a martyr, it's manipulative. And that manipulation can cause incredible distress for people who are in these relationships, who get buried under the guilt, the grief, the obligation, the exhaustion, the self-blame, the sort of feeling like a bad person of it all, while simultaneously having the world often looking at you as either fortunate or ungrateful because you are complaining about all of this martyry stuff. And you end up perhaps with a lot of mismatched furniture, spoiled food, unwanted text messages, interrupted days, clothes that don't fit, and trips to the charity shop. At least, though, someone out there is going to like that sweater they gave you and snap it up at a bargain price. Have you ever had this happen? You are in a conversation with a narcissistic, antagonistic, manipulative person. You're doing all the things, right? You're not defending. You're not engaging. You're not explaining. You're not personalizing. You're being good about the radical acceptance. You aren't even fighting yourself having strong reactions. You're standing strong. But narcissistic people are really like, when it comes to arguments, they're like prize fighters. They can go all 15 rounds and they will wear you down. I think with narcissistic folks, it's almost like a war of attrition. So maybe for the first few minutes, even first hour or so, you can sit there like a Zen master as they keep throwing nutty stuff at you. But then you may get worn down, especially the longer the conversation goes on. Maybe they say something to you that hits your pressure point. Maybe they're just in an argumentative mood that day. Maybe they accuse you of something abominable that you never did, wouldn't even consider doing. This is a unique aspect of narcissistic relationships. In early days, in adult narcissistic relationships, and certainly family members would know these vulnerabilities as a matter of course, just because of time served in a family. Your narcissistic family members know exactly where to get you, poke you, to get a rise out of you. They know your vulnerabilities. They might make an accusation towards you that is untrue. They may throw an insult at you that really doesn't sit well. They may tease you about something that you're sensitive about. They may keep painting you out as incompetent or overly emotional or not well, even though you are the thing that's keeping a family or a business together. For short bursts, narcissistic people can also keep it together and stay calm, especially when they are sparring, and especially as time goes on. They are wearing you down. Your resistance, not engaging in all the rest of that, is actually exhausting for you, because you're having to hold back on so much, to not react, to not respond at exactly times when we would respond, right? Most survivors of narcissistic relationships tend to overregulate. It's a combination of mild dissociation, numbness, helplessness, maybe even some trauma responses, learning about how narcissistic relationships work, learning that there is no point, and even quite a bit of risk at showing emotion. So you train yourself into that place, and then some of it could be a manifestation of, again, trauma responses. And in many of these encounters, if they go on long enough, we crack. We do. We may yell back. We may throw back zingers ourselves. But the thing to remember is that as we get more dysregulated than them, they tend to stay calm and even get calmer. They may even start speaking really calmly, almost like they're talking you down from a high place. And it feels awful because it feels like they won. Now, I say that you should never call a narcissistic person out directly. It never ends well. There's really no point. It takes an already messy situation and it makes it much messier, and nothing changes. But that's not good enough for many of you, and saying, no, that doesn't work for me. I want to call them out. So that said, how do you unmask them? Maybe the result is not that they say, oh, yeah, thanks for explaining that to me. I get it. I am narcissistic and that's not always nice for you. But maybe unmasking them means that other people see it. You put a little fear in them. Or that the narcissistic person's usual tricks with you or other people don't work. Now keep in mind the things I'm about to share, this list is not doable by everyone because it can require some real shifts within you. And making these shifts within you takes time. But if you do want to pull their mask off, here are some ways you could try to pull that smug mask off of them. The key ultimately to getting the narcissistic person unmasked centers on one premise. As long as you are the one suffering, but other people are not, nobody is going to listen to or likely believe your tale of harm, manipulation, and emotional abuse. Sadly, other people need to get hurt too for them to see it. And frankly, setting conditions for other people to get screwed by the narcissistic person is the key to unmasking them. I know that doesn't feel good. The goal of unmasking is that other people also see the narcissistic behavior and you stop having to convince people that this relationship or situation, or frankly even this person, isn't healthy. I'm going to give you some thoughts here. Number one is, and I am not kidding you, don't take the bait. I know I say this all the time, but don't take the bait. Don't. Now, this is sort of a high level unmasking. Maybe I should have even put this point last. And if you are tired, or you're stressed, or you're worn down, or you're overwhelmed, or the conversation with them is just going on too long, trying not to take the bait is like trying to walk 25 miles on a 100-degree day. It's not easy, it may not be possible, and it's probably going to kill you. Metaphorically, at least. I mean, not in the 100-degree day, you literally probably are going to potentially be fatal. But in a way, there are things you need to do to get to this point of not taking the bait. But if you can get to this point, you will unmask them at some point. So what can be useful is to figure out how to get to the place where you can not, when you learn how not to take the bait. So let's make this point 1A. Because if you don't take the bait, you have to be prepared for them to escalate. They need you to take the bait. And this is where most people sort of fall off and aren't able to do it. When you stop engaging with the narcissistic person in the same way, they will escalate. The insults will become worse. The anger, the poking at your vulnerabilities. If you can endure this period, you will be able to do this, which would take us then to point 1B. If you get through their initial escalations when you don't take the bait, and you can stand strong a few times, you might slowly sense them deflating. And you have to fight against the trauma-bonded drive to want to help them, because they'll turn into victims at this point. You have to turn off that drive to want to help them or engage so they don't seem as deflated. And that's also that fawn response too. And you also try not to lose that sense of radical acceptance. Because if you are able to disengage enough and not take the bait at all, the narcissistic person may start, even behind closed doors with you, may start privately unmasking in a way that feels sad and even vulnerable. And you, sweet you, may even want to rescue them by throwing them a bone and fighting with them again. They may apologize and they may come clean. You don't have to tell them that you don't believe them. But you also can't fall right into, yay, everything's changed. Especially if you can't leave the relationship. Watch the apologies that they give you when they start becoming deflated. And more than anything, watch their behavior at that point too. Because remember, the core of healing, remember that the core of healing from narcissistic relationships, just because they have been unkind to you, or mean, or invalidating, or betraying, you don't have to be unkind to them. Now, they may think your disengagement is unkind, but I'm talking deliberately unkind. But you do have to fight the urge to rescue them, or return the dynamic to what it was, where they continue to bait you and try to break their tension by getting you to react. Now, number 2, in some cases, to unmask, you have to make some short-term sacrifices to get the mask off. It may mean that you let them spend money on something stupid in a stupid way and don't try to stop them and let them deal with the mess. Now, they're still going to blame you later, but by not engaging with them about it, they have less of a leg to stand on, and the receipts will be in their name. Or you could go along with a bad plan they made. I once did this with someone narcissistic. It was around travel planning, right? For a long time, I had tried to keep this person from their own mistakes, right? But by doing that, obviously, no one's making a perfect choice. You plan travel, you're kind of shooting into the air, but obviously my choice wasn't always perfect either. But I tended to make better choices because I did more research. And while I'd make a better choice, my choice would sometimes still have problems. And so because my choices weren't perfect, I was still being designated as the travel planning problem. So when I said to hell with it, I'm going to let this person make all the choices. And I knew it would ruin the trip. I knew it. It ruined the trip. And actually made the trip at times a little bit dangerous. But I said nothing to stop it. Now, while this person didn't unmask fully, they did have to explain to other people that we were seeing in this place why we couldn't join them for dinner or do some activities that those people had planned because of how foolishly we made our plans, or they made our plans. I just shrugged. about how our travel plans were made, and they looked at the narcissistic person oddly for making such a bad plan. And watching that was like watching a balloon literally deflate. The narcissistic person did turn to me and say, "I know you want to say I told you so." And I nodded and I said, "No, I didn't. I never said anything. It just was what it was." But interestingly, I wasn't blamed. It definitely ruined that trip. But the win for me was it confirmed I was not crazy. The other people involved were aware that this was not my decision because I was totally hands off. I didn't try to save it. It meant sacrificing my trip, but that was the price. And it became a little more clear to the people who were present what the deal was. So I'd call it, at least in my story, it was like an unmasking light, but I felt less crazy, which was the win. The third thing here to think about is you got to get to indifference. Now, getting indifferent is the ultimate unmask because it's the equivalent of letting a toddler tantrum in the middle of the restaurant and not feeling embarrassed about it and not caring what anybody thinks about you. Now, getting to indifference, especially in a narcissistic relationship, is not easy, especially if you even feel a shred of compassion for the narcissistic person. I have known people to get to indifference by building out meaningful, purposeful, or even fun activities or relationships in their lives, or talking about the relationship with validating people, but having a life that felt fuller and seeing the narcissistic person as sort of like a bad smell that they had to live with, or like an ant problem that they have in the kitchen that they can't just quite get rid of. There's always a couple of ants crawling in. But it doesn't define their existence, and it sucks a little. The indifference pulls the mask off because you really don't engage, because you really don't care. At this point, you will see the narcissistic person probably try lots of strategies. They may be meaner to you. They may be nicer to you. They may try to hoover you a bit. They may love bomb. They may make apologies. They may even come clean. Here's the key. You have to hold on to radical acceptance. And really, I think radical acceptance and indifference go hand in hand. But the beauty of indifference, when you get there, if you can get there, is the really not investing so much of that heavy level care in it anymore. This is the ultimate unmask. Because at this point, it's just a matter of time before the narcissistic person will get dysregulated because the old tricks they'd use of domination and control and baiting and poking you and making you look dysregulated and out of control, they no longer work. It's a lot of shrugging on your part, like a lot of that. They will accuse you of being manipulative, cold, doing the silent treatment. But if you're indifferent, they could say those things to you. You know they're not true, and none of it really matters as much anymore. They can call you what they want. Indifference means you are pretty much gaslight proof in this relationship. But again, this indifference thing, a relatively small percentage of people get there. And that takes us to number 4, which is that the ultimate unmask is allowing them to get dysregulated around other people and not try to interfere or to fix it. Most people in narcissistic relationships try to intervene. They try to protect the server in the restaurant or the other employee that you're working with together or the flight attendant or the other family members at the dinner. You've been doing this for years. You've been trying to protect other people from the narcissistic person's dysregulation. You also may not want to ruin a nice day for yourself and other people, or a dinner out, or ruin the waiter's day, or blow up the staff meeting or the family vacation. Blow it up. The only way people see it is if nobody intervenes. And most of us do. Maybe some of it is our own shame that this dysregulated, rude, obnoxious, entitled person is our partner or our family member or our colleague or our boss, and we may just be trying to protect ourselves. Let them blow. Sit there calmly. If other people want to intervene, let them intervene. But above all else, let other people see it. And by those other people intervening, they're going to see it too. Now, letting them blow doesn't mean everyone will see them as narcissistic, but at least some people in your midst are going to see them as off. The narcissistic person will most likely blame you for their blow up, which is why point number 3, the indifference, is so important to unmasking them. The corollary to this, though, is to also let other people get hurt by them. I know it sounds hard, especially if it's kids, right? But most people in the world are self-interested and will often take the stance of, well, I never had any trouble with them. I don't know that they're narcissistic. Let the other people have trouble with them. And if the narcissistic person isn't getting the same rise out of you, and you're completely clicked out, they may start turning to other people. And someone else will likely need to be harmed so they will understand it too. This strategy works well in groups and systems like families and workplaces and even friend groups. But make no mistake, some people are still going to be mad at you for not intervening, as though you've been such a useful human shield for so long, they're going to be pissed that they have to do it. Then there's number 5, and this is an important one. If indeed you hope to unmask the narcissistic person, do not call them narcissistic to other people. These words, narcissism, gaslighting, toxic, more and more, even though they're useful words, they have a lot of people on edge. They tend to get overused on social media and other places, and people think you're the bad one for using these words. Okay, so don't use them. Let the narcissistic person's behavior show to the world and speak about what is happening in the relationship rather than using sort of global descriptive terms like they're toxic, they're narcissistic. So when someone asks you, hey, why aren't you coming to the party tonight? You tell the truth. My partner, family member, friend, whoever the narcissistic person is in your life, they didn't want to come. And I wasn't able to drive myself, or I didn't have the bandwidth for the argument. Speak the truth. Share the behavior. If the other person asks, well, why are they, this narcissistic person in your life, why are they so grumpy? You can say to them, ask them, I don't know. For too long, you have been the behavioral and psychological publicist for the narcissistic person. You've been their crisis intervention person. Don't do it anymore. But don't use the almighty narcissism word. These days, it is being used to view the person, you, who's already going through stuff in the narcissistic relationship, as the problem. Describe the behavior and don't excuse the behavior and let other people deal with it. Number 6, don't call the narcissistic person or people out in front of other people. It's not just about calling them out as narcissistic, but even about calling out their crappy behavior. I think we as a world are bizarrely trauma bonded to narcissistic people these days. Maybe there are just, I don't know, maybe there's just too many TikTok videos about toxic people. And the world of narcissism non-believers want to prove everyone else who's been hurt by these relationships, they want to prove you wrong. There's no such thing as a toxic person. Well, listen, the narcissistic people will sink their own ship if you give them enough space. So give them the space. You don't have to be the one to call them out. We get this wrong all the time. And what happens is we want to tell other people they're narcissistic. What ends up happening, sadly, is it ends up making you look like the petty one or the bad one to other people, and may even result in people defending the narcissistic person. That's what you're trying to avoid. Let the narcissistic person fail on their own. You don't need arrows pointing it out. But as you can see, none of the strategies I'm talking about here, these aren't about literally pointing out these patterns to other people, but instead letting the narcissistic person do their thing, not intervening on their behalf and trying to protect them, and letting other people see it. And this is all easier said than done, I know. And I am not going to lie. Even after all of this, people may not see it. When there are so many narcissistic leaders, heads of companies, politicians, bosses, their enablers and their supporters don't see it until the bad thing that the leader does affects them directly. And even then, the enablers and supporters will still find someone else to blame. It really depends on how culty the narcissistic system is. Sometimes it takes narcissistic people literally getting arrested or screwing over a lot of people or incontrovertible video evidence, something that you can't deny, to unmask the narcissistic person. And obviously,